Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Solidarity Live. It is a bit of a rainy day today, but I think this week has been, I don't know, not terrible, which is good. And, I think there's some developments on stuff that we're working on and talking about that are really good. Other ones that aren't so good. I did like that progressives said, they stood up and said, don't count on our votes if climate isn't in the reconciliation bill, if climate's not dealt with in infrastructure. Until then, we know it was all, oh, you might not get a moderate vote. I like it when the progressives say, you can't afford to lose a single vote from either side. So I love all that. And we'll talk about that. But this show is really exciting because we're going to be talking about a book that's coming out, Jocelyn.
Yeah, so we are here with leftist novelist Sarah Lazare to talk about her novel Testimony, which is also her first novel and will be coming out through Strong Arm Press, the publishing company that Alex started and we both work on. And it's so exciting to have you here, Sarah. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me on.
So I don't even know where to start. Could you tell people a little bit about your novel?
Sure. Testimony is I like to call it a regulatory noir. It's about the corporate capture of utilities regulators and the buildup to the Iraq War. And it looks at how post 9/11 fears were exploited to push through a whole host of bad policies. And it's also about sort of the reluctant rediscovery of lost idealism. I co-authored it with my late father, Peter Lazar. Before he passed away in 2018, he wrote the first draft. And I spent the 2 years following his death editing it and adding to it and viewing it as a writing collaboration. And my dad worked at the Illinois Commerce Commission for 20 years. And the book is entirely fictional, but it draws on his experience. And what I really try to do is take something what we try to do is take something that people don't often find sexy, which is utilities regulation, and use the thriller format to make the case for its incredibly high stakes and to make the case that it's really, really important to address the pretty horrific malfeasance, the problem of the monopolization of utilities. And ultimately, I hope that the book can be a boon for people who are doing the important work of trying to put utilities under public democratic control.
So there's a lot to go there. I kind of want to do the normal, like, what was the writing process like? But then that policy angle is also really great, especially because it can kind of let us display, you said corporate malfeasance, which is totally true, but like sociopathic world killing is also sort of another phrase you could use for the extractive industries. And that the capitalist system that we put these extractive industries in, so oil, coal, gas, it can't actually produce anything other than a continued destruction of the world. And so when you don't have that public side to it, and you're just driven by your quarterly reports to Wall Street, there literally is only one path. And that extractive industries, then we go to the carriers, and who's yours in Illinois? It's ComEd or ComEd or Con-Ed? ComEd, right?
ComEd Services Chicago, yeah.
So like they're one of the classic ones of, oh, well, we're going to privatize pieces of the system. It's going to deliver a whole bunch of value to you. And you're like, no, it doesn't. This literally never happened. I am comfortable saying that. I know, Sarah, you're a journalist, so there might be like one time that it happened and delivered some efficiency. But generally what happens is you've got billions of dollars at stake here, and a small group of people who can profit just outrageously more money than they could ever spend in generations, but somehow without regulatory pressure or a public ownership structure, these people are supposed to just act correctly. So
Right.
I love it. Regulatory noir, right? Is that what you called it?
Yeah, yeah.
I love that phrase because the idea of, as you said, it's like some of the most material things that we have, important to our survival as a species, depend on really, really like broken systems that are supposed to be putting up guardrails to these companies that can only profit only leads to one place, maximization. And that means extracting it from the people. So there's all my what I wanted to throw in as the what you're writing this novel about. Why a novel? Because I love it. I love it's Strong Arm Press's first novel, and Ryan Grimm, our Strong Arm Press partner publisher, brought it in. I think you brought it to him, and it was an immediate yes, we have to publish this because it did all the things. All of our books are about building power and progressive populist politics, and we'd never had a novel, but yours does all of the things. Do you have any thoughts on why a novel is well situated to deliver this kind of message?
Yeah. So, as a journalist, when I do journalistic writing, I have to proceed very carefully. Every line has to be factually accurate. It's a more slow moving process. When you're working on a novel, it's very different because your imagination is really the engine, and you can find ways to get new perspective or new focus on real pressing issues in the world, but do it in a way where you have a little more freedom to be driven by plot and imagine characters and have an interpretation of the world that might not be accurate, that might be fictional, but nonetheless offers a new perspective. And so that was something that was really fun about working on this book that my dad wrote the first draft of. The freeness of it was really cool. And my hope is that using that genre can allow sort of a window into an issue that people, that doesn't, I think, get the attention that it deserves. So you brought a lot of really important stuff. So, when you're looking at sort of how utilities operate in the United States, one big issue is climate. A lot of them use coal, use really climate destructive sources of energy. And then there's another completely related injustice, which is just really high prices for ratepayers. So you have seniors on fixed incomes having to decide between medicines and heat bills in the winter. And sometimes they're forced to sort of just cut back on their heat bills and turn the stove really high and huddle next to the stove, which is very unsafe and is not how elders should live in our society. And so you have this climate injustice layered on top of class oppression and class injustice. And I think that's why the issue of utilities and how they operate in this country are garnering more interest and attention from the resurgent left in the United States. And so my hope is that fiction can be a vehicle for really illuminating this issue. Is it okay if I read an excerpt? I have a one paragraph excerpt. So this was my attempt to sort of look at the issue of why regulatory capture is such a problem. So the scene is the main character, Sam, and his friend Greg are hanging out in an off-track betting place in Springfield, Illinois, and they're both getting a little tipsy. Off-track betting, for those who don't know, is where you bet on horses, but remotely. Okay, so look, United is a natural monopoly. And United is the gas company. Or sorry, is the power utility, excuse me. Look, United is a natural monopoly. It's not like you're going to have multiple gas lines going into people's houses. Greg was nodding his head impatiently as if to say, yes, I know this already, but Sam plowed ahead. So those executives figured out they'd rather be regulated than hand their goods over to public control. Although public control makes the most sense, even according to the logic of capitalism, since there is no competition. Hell, executives prefer having the Commerce Commission so long as the utility companies are able to hire all these assholes who are pros at gaming the system and finding ways around regulation. So now utilities are making more in profits than the free market would ever give them. And with all those regulators, it looks like the oversight system is robust. So yeah, I guess I tried to use the plot and characters, and my dad did as well. I want to emphasize my dad did the hardest part, which was writing the first draft. And so wanted to use those characters to really teach people how the system works and what's wrong with it.
Yeah, that's like Alex said, there's so much I want to ask. Not to get us off topic from the issue, but Sarah, what was it like writing with your dad in that way? That sounds like such a powerful experience.
Yeah, I was really glad to be able to do it. My dad was an amazing writer. He, I'm pretty convinced he had a lot of books in him, and I'm very glad that one is seeing light of day. So one thing about my dad is he's had a really interesting history. He was a radical leftist. He protested the Vietnam War. In the late 70s and early 80s, he worked in a garment factory in Chicago as part of the Socialist Workers' Party, trying to sort of build a socialist movement. He ultimately found that to be a pretty tough experience, and a lot of his ideas changed. And he and I, so a lot of his ideas changed, but he always had a pretty strong critique of capitalism and how it functions. And he and I had a lot of conversations about politics, and we didn't always agree. It was always a struggle, but also he was like my closest comrade and someone who I love talking about politics with. So the book was a way to continue those discussions. And I hope what I really wanted was for it to be a love letter to people who take big risks to try to fight for radical ideals. Truly radical organizing is really tough. It takes a lot of sacrifice. And it's a big risk because you're fighting and organizing for something that doesn't exist yet. You know, you're going on faith and you're giving your life for it. And that's something that my dad spent a lot of his life doing. And, you know, the book engages questions of burnout and is it worth continuing the fight for beautiful ideals? And so it's meant to be a love letter to people who are struggling with those questions.
Yeah, and I mean that's very apparent, you know. I mean, it opens up with him not being in the best, the protagonist not being in the best place emotionally. Do you think this, not to be invasive and feel free to say no, but did you find the draft? Were you and your dad collaborating initially on this? Like, how did that work?
So I knew my dad had been working on a book for quite a while. And he had allowed me to see earlier drafts of it. But when he passed away, it had been some time since I had taken a look. So a few months after he passed away, I decided to sit down and read sort of the most recent version. And it's a really interesting book. And sort of contained within it, I found this very self-contained thriller. So after talking with my partner, Adam, and he reviewed it as well, we sort of thought it made sense to cut out the other stuff and just really focus on the thriller portion of it. But the other stuff in the book still nonetheless informs the characters and stuff like that and comprises part of the backstory. So then I just proceeded to spend the next couple years just going through editing, one of the things that changed was when my dad did the draft, he didn't really specify the time period. So I decided to set it in 2002 in the build up to the Iraq War and sort of add this layer of, how post 9/11 fears were being exploited onto the initial story by him, which was initially a pretty straightforward thriller about utilities and malfeasance and regulatory capture. So then I just spent, every single minute of my free time for about 2 years, just working on it. My partner, Adam Johnson, gave a lot of support and editing feedback. And the result is testimony.
The result is wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Alex, you want to say something?
Mine was going to be, this is a really great discussion of like the process of the book. I kind of want to take it to like, oh, well, we built Strong Arm Press. And I want to tell you, I don't think we've ever had this conversation. A lot of it was around Ryan's book, We've Got People. So, we have Ryan Grimm and he's got this book. And we've published books at Social Security Works with a wonderful new press. We've done the whole thing. And during the process, I love the new press. But during the process, I was like, I think we can just have our own publishing company. And the reason that I wanted it, the means to produce books, is because books are the artillery in the war of ideas. And the plutocrats and the right wing understand this like, the same way they understand that talk radio is the infantry or it's softening up the turf. But books are where you can put new ideas into the world. And then you can do like derivative media from it, like this, right? So this is what we're doing. We publish the book and now we're having you on our show, and then we'll push it out through social media. And like, the concept of memes, this sticky information that you're passing information from person to person. That is why I love a novel, because whatever, maybe I'm boring, but like in my brain, I always had big policy book ideas. And one thing we learned is actually that smaller policy books do better than big policy books. So we should cut our books down and they should be like this big instead of like this big. Because not everyone's going to be pickety. Not everyone is going to write a book that's like this big and somehow everybody buys it and puts it on their shelf and doesn't read it.
Okay, but the percentage of people who read that book, I bet, are like 5%.
Less. Are you kidding? The whole book, it's less, like his plan and the problem statement. But that's why I love a novel. And it's not like it's secret, right? Like it's published on Strong Arm Press. It's really clear what you're doing, but still it's that sticky idea, right? Like that our brains are actually set up to understand stories way more than anything else. And the hippocampus its purpose is stories, and they have narrative arcs. I won't go super deep on that because I do find it fascinating that around the world the arcs look different. The Western arc is really sort of it's got a shape that's quite easy. But that ability to transfer this knowledge of like regulatory capture, because I work a lot on lowering drug prices on pharma, and I try to explain to people, and it's so obvious. I'm like, look, what they do is they charge astronomical amounts because they have a monopoly, and then they take a little teeny piece of that and they give it to the government, who grants them the monopoly to charge astronomical amounts that they take a little teeny piece of and give, right? And it's so obvious to me, but you can watch it bang off someone's head, right? They're like, I'm not listening to all that. I'm sorry it happened, or congratulations, right? Whatever. You can see it not get into their brains. There's a resistance, a cognitive resistance. And that's what I think a novel can get past, because you grab them with the thriller, with the noir of it, and then you're delivering this information in a different medium. I just kind of want to see what interests me is like, I can ask you, but did your father also see that? Is that why he was working? I hadn't heard the story that you focused in on the thriller. So I'm interested in like, was that the idea, do you think, that he had and that you, and then your perspective on it?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that my dad thought very deeply about the material forces that drive climate change, that drive regulatory capture. And if the original novel that he wrote covered a ton of ground and explored a lot of the political questions that I know he struggled with. You know, there was a section of the book that looked at, you know, his earlier engagement with socialist politics when he was younger. There was a section of the book that looks at some of his garment factory experience, you know, thinly veiled autobiographical stuff. And so, you know, basically what I know about my dad, I know that he used the writing process to sort through really big questions that he had. I think that fiction can be a really compelling, interesting way to examine a sort of materialist view of society. So to look at what are the forces behind how our society functions and how do they impact people on a very personal level. You know, one of the things that I looked at in the book was specifically the buildup to the Iraq War and how that jingoistic environment enabled privatization that had already been in motion well before the buildup, well before September 11th, but was kind of a boon to anyone in society trying to expand corporate power and expand privatization. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is sort of, you know, the Trump administration. During the Trump administration, we saw an effort to kind of rebrand George W. Bush and earlier Republicans as more ethical, more cuddly. You know, George W. Bush is just a gentle painter, just a grandpa that you want to hang out with. And I often worry that for people under 30, the horrors of the post 9/11 years, the horrors of the buildup to the Iraq War kind of go down the memory hole. I think that that's an incredibly important time to remember if we want to avoid catastrophes on that scale. But unfortunately, it feels like that's often forgotten. And so another goal I had was to kind of lift up that period. And, you know, that was the period, the political landscape was very, very tough, but there were also really interesting social movements at that time. So, you know, in the late 90s and early 2000s, you had the global justice movement, you know, giant protests against the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank. And then after 9/11, a lot of that energy got siphoned into the movement against the Iraq War and the Afghanistan wars. So you had all this really interesting stuff going on. And so another thing I try to do is look at how the main character, Sam, sort of moved through both of those movements and had both good and bad experiences. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know Jocelyn is going to ask a question, but I just want to, the memory hole thing. I want to just add to the stack of things we shouldn't forget, and I think the thematics of the novel are aimed at the feeling. Then it was the media's fault. Like they were horrible, and I don't believe that people who weren't there can fully, totally grok just how bad they were across the board. Like Fred Hyatt, who still is at the Washington Post, has never apologized for the fact that they literally just drumbeat the entire nation into war. And Jocelyn and I were talking earlier about the who could have foreseen stuff, right? Like when it all just went exactly as expected, terribly wrong. And everyone was like, oh, who could have foreseen? And the Fred Hyatts and all of the TV people And they're like, oh, well, we didn't know. And you're like, you chose not to know. You were part of it. You weren't the media. You were the propaganda cannon. And they've never changed. I mean, the most popular thing that Trump did, according to the TVs, was when he launched missiles, the thrill up people's legs on television when they talk about and they have the videos of the missiles going. They love it. They love war. And war creates the chaos that the plutocrats grab all of our money, all of our systems under. So I just want to add to the don't forget, Fred Hyatt is his name. He's never apologized. He's just one of many. But Washington Post in particular was one of the drivers of that. So you had, and man, the rehabilitation efforts on George W. Bush. Oh, look, he paints, and you're like, he tortured people. We still have Guantanamo Bay because of this guy, filled with people who are innocent of stuff. There are innocent people in Guantanamo Bay that we don't know what to do with because we put them in an oubliette. He created an American oubliette. Let's never forget that. So I love that idea in there as well. So I love that you vocalized it.
Yeah, I think I know that my dad had a very, very strong critique of U.S. foreign policy and war making. And to me, it's really just a testament to the amount of chauvinism, U.S. chauvinism there is in the U.S., that people who are responsible for having a hand in the killing of, according to some studies, 1 million Iraqis, that they still get to have a public life. I mean, that's just totally ludicrous. There are so many people who voted for that war. Our president, Joe Biden, played a big role in leading the march to that war and getting Democrats on board. And the idea that you wouldn't at the very least just sort of spend the rest of your life begging for forgiveness and promise to bow to public life forever. The idea that that's not even something people think that they should do is just shows that we're not paying enough attention and that we need a more robust and bigger anti-war movement in the U.S.
Well, and I think I want to get back to the point of fiction. I was someone who was radicalized by fiction. My parents are pretty standard, like, what do we call them, Democrats? They would be moderate Republicans in literally any other point in history. Yeah. Like, my father will literally say things like, if people are poor, perhaps they should have made better decisions. So, like, I was not born into a radical family. And, like, it's caused serious issues because I had this thing called a library card. And, like, I would, of course, you eventually start reading novels. You start reading books about policy, and that's great. But it doesn't start that way. I mean, the novel, is this true? I would say one of the novels that radicalized me was, like, reading Les Mis in middle school, which is Victor Hugo basically just complaining about rich people for 1,200 pages. And it's like, we don't understand that it's like Alex was saying, all this stuff, when you're hearing it, can be very overwhelming when it's delivered from a place of facts. But when you read a novel, when you read a story of, a brave Chicagoan going against the powers that be, it hits you in a different way. It makes you think about your life in a different way. And it's why we need not just like this novel, but so many more novels. We need a lot of novels and potentially a leftist reality TV show. I've been thinking about this for a while. Because I think it's kind of difficult when, like, it just people shut down. And stories have a way of making us feel safe enough to hear what's being said.
Yeah, in the course of working on this book, I met, or I had a lot of conversations with longtime leftist activists and organizers and writers who moved into fiction and believed pretty strongly that it's critical for the left to engage fiction. I want to give a shout out to Bill Fletcher and Kate Raphael. Those are two writers who actually just really helped me a ton. They both have written really good mystery novels that are absolutely informed by their very airtight and interesting leftist analyses. Yeah, you know, I think that there are people out there who are trying to sort of push the left to engage in fiction more, engage the mystery and thriller genre. You know, there are a lot of critiques to be made of the fiction publishing industry. I was really excited that Strong Arm Press wanted to publish this book because I was really interested in just working with people with progressive and left political commitments already, because that was the place that I was coming from. But so there are other really cool books out there, and I encourage people to check out those authors. They're really great.
Is there a maybe we have to build it? Is there like a venue that you think you could find some of that? Like if you were to, you know, our folks who are watching and listening, if they're interested in lefty, you know, leftist analysis and socialist analysis, but fiction, is there a podcast or anything like that you know to get, or is there a part of Twitter, people that we could follow, etc.?
You know,
good question.
I am new enough to fiction writing that I feel like I'm not the best person to ask. But I will say that so right now I'm working on a launch event for the book, and I decided that for the event I'm gonna just interview other authors who are leftists who do fiction and talk to them about why fiction is important for the left. So I'm working on organizing that right now. So that'll be one place that folks can sort of engage more in this conversation. But as far as a hub or a place, I'm not the best person to ask about that because I'm so new. But I think I certainly think more should exist.
Yeah, we're gonna look. We're broadly speaking about cultural power, and that cultural power is very deep. It's very profound. Activist power. I have a whole thing in my head of understanding these different places, because activist power is super acute. It's very important and can be super strong, but it generally has a shorter time period. And faith power is extremely deep, extremely profound, but moves super duper slowly. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of other ones in there, but cultural power is sort of in the middle. It's how do we tell stories about ourselves and what we're doing to make sense of the world in that, you know, we're seeing. And also when you're talking from a leftist perspective, in the face of massive amounts of propaganda. That's why I was bringing up the media. Like, the amount of propaganda that's fired at us about this is amazing. It's so effective that where there was public infrastructure, they fire propaganda at people, and people sign away. They're like, no, I think probably giving it to this business will end up being better for me, even though we're like, look, it's never happened.
Well, and it's
again and again.
Because propaganda creates stories, and like, you know, you gotta, if you want to be a radical in America, unless you literally are like born to some commune, and trust me, I know the commune people, they're delightful, but they're rare. You know, you have to fight a serious urge, a serious case of in-group mentality, because you're going to be the odd person out in most of the institutions you enter. And that is why this, like, these stories are so important, I think, because when we can create a different sort of inner monologue for ourselves, a different sense of spiritual thing, that is the power that becomes more powerful than the voices around us and the propaganda around us and our Republican uncles and whatnot. Because, you know, I think one of the things that is really important for all radicals to feel is a certain amount of self-gratitude, because to even be in the political left, like the sincere political left, not just like, you know, no Trump or whatever. Like, protesting got very trendy recently. I don't know. But like being a sincere leftist takes a lot of courage, because 90% of the population is going to think you're crazy. And I don't know. I mean, that I think is a big motif of your novel, Sarah. Would you disagree with that?
Yeah, I think it's my dad and I really did try to give a shout out to people who are really struggling and really trying to both live by their ideals and constantly improve upon those ideals with analysis, that's something that it's really important for me, to me, that people get out of this book. And I agree, cultural products are very important and powerful, and so many of them are controlled by the wealthy almost by definition. I mean, Jeff Bezos gets to be the equivalent of a Hollywood producer because he's so rich, and rich people are always going to finance things that in some way or another serve the interests of rich people. He's not funding some expose on labor exploitation. He's a major exploiter of labor. My partner and I have recently been rewatching that extremely right-wing show that was really popular right after September 11th, 24.
I forgot about that show.
Yeah,
gracious.
Yeah, it just totally encapsulates the way the right wing seized on anxiety and fear during that period. And stuff like that is not benign. These are the products that shape a lot of political consciousness in the United States. And so I think it's really important for the left to have its own cultural products, which of course is always going to be harder because you're not going to have money backing you up. So it takes a lot of scrappiness and publishers that are willing to take risks and, a lot of cobbling things together. But there are obviously a ton of really amazing examples of leftists who, without a ton of resources, make really beautiful art. And I think that's really important.
So do I. I have lots of places to go.
Do you think we could get Bezos to fund our labor exploitation reality TV show? I'm just saying we should think about it.
We should at least think about it. I think the reality TV show should actually be that we launch all of the billionaires into space, which they're obviously like dying to get off the Earth. But we somehow, it's like we launch them into space, all of them, and then we're like, I think there's a second part to the show, but we haven't. It's unscripted reality television. They have to come back. I don't know, something like that.
I would love it.
Yeah, I know. I think it would be really quite popular. The venues that books open up is something that I want to sort of. That's where I would go on this question. When we do our other books, and we're, it's you actually just laid out a lot of why we created Strong Arm Press, because I needed it, because we weren't getting enough of our ideas into the lifeblood. Why did I build We Act Radio that has a television studio in it and develop the capabilities to do live streaming like this? And Act TV did the same thing. Because we needed it. Because I was sitting there in 2010 watching the media be like, so everybody knows Social Security is running out of money. It's going bankrupt. Of course we have to cut benefits. And, the sage, smart people would be like, yeah, we don't want to, but we have to. And I'm like, this is all BS. This is just, you guys and it really sets off this anger in me that comes from being lied into the Iraq War. I was part of the movement that was like, no. And then to have all these people be like, who could have foreseen that this didn't go? And I'm like, all of us. We ringed the White House with 100,000 people with Operation Ceasefire. It was the biggest thing that I've ever seen. And there were church folk from the Midwest, to radicals from Brooklyn and everything in between. And the media went up to like the one pot smoking, dude who would say something just super off the wall, probably had cop boots on because he was probably a Fed, and, got his comment. And then they shrunk it all down into, there was no dissent. It's just this pot smoking hippie who says this. And, they erase the global movement against this. These marches were part of a global movement, a popular movement that said absolutely not, no. But the media manufactured it, and and the media is sort of writ large. It's the publishing is part of it. Television, radio, broadcasting, all of that is selling these narratives. And then there's these in-person venues that books allow you. It's not just in person. Like there's these venues that books give you, because now you're an author. You're an editor in these times. That opens up venues. Being an author opens up these other venues. Like you have a book and you can set up events. Now as things are opening up more, bookstores and book conferences and things like that. And the most radical group of people, or at least in my experience, librarians, that's really who I think you should really connect with closely. They're going to love this book. But like, have you thought through that aspect going forward? The publication is it's July 20th. You can pre-order the book right now on Strong Arm Press, strongarmpress.org. But you can find it on everywhere if you just Google the title Testimony. Yeah, and that's the question. Have you thought about that? Those venues that you want to get into with the book?
Yeah, so I've started reaching out to organizers around the country who are part of campaigns to put utilities under public democratic control. And I have also reached out to anti-war organizers, people working to end the Yemen war, for example, just because there are a lot of anti-war themes. But I have not reached out to librarians, but that's a great idea. I should do that. Yeah, and just speaking of what you were talking about earlier with the, pro-war propaganda machine, for the past 30 years, the right has been building institutions to spread propaganda and spread its policy goals, and has been really effective at it. There's a whole small army of think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, and there are, media outlets, and it's much easier for them to create this infrastructure than the left because they have big funders, because oil companies and gas companies and banks, they want to finance the right, or they want to finance ideas that are going to be favorable to their interests. And the left has a much more uphill battle, but I actually think that the left building up that infrastructure, but of course doing it to embody left ideals, is incredibly important. And I know there are a lot of people working towards that, and there's more that we need to do. But yeah, I think I'm really excited about the outreach part of this. All I want in the world is to just talk to people about the book and about the characters and hear how it impacts people. I just, in my mind, it's a way of sort of keeping my dad's ideas alive, and also just engaging in political discussions that I'm really eager to have. So I'm really excited about that part of the process.
I have one follow-up, Jocelyn. Sorry, just
it's okay.
I love the idea of going to the activists, like going. That's the venue that I think. So like DSA, and I can see that, and I can see how this book could get out through those avenues. Have you ever been to the Heritage Foundation?
No.
So there's, I did this amazing class when I was getting my master's in policy. We went to all the think tanks, not all the think tanks, but like a cross section of think tanks, hard right domestic, hard right international, right, the spectrum. So from Institutes for Policy Studies as the left, and the difference was so amazing. So like Institutes for Policy Studies, which is an amazing think tank. Actually, they're so amazing that the fascist government in Chile assassinated one of their people on American soil. I believe the only act of state-sponsored assassination on American soil was of a think tank leftist fellow. But if you go there, it's like it's sort of what you would expect, what I envision in my head. lot of smart people talking. They're writing a lot. When you go to the Heritage Foundation, it's literally just, there's a whole floor that's just media training. It's just teaching you how to look into a camera and train their people on how to deliver this propaganda with a smile on their face and nice teeth and the whole thing. And it is not a quiet think tank. It is a propaganda machine. They take young activists and they teach them these techniques. And so I wanted to just say that because you pointed out the Heritage Foundation, who ran Ronald Reagan. So the Heritage Foundation is the intellectual and propaganda engine that has this 30-year, 40-year neoliberal failed experiment, with Reagan and Thatcher. So the power that comes from that sort of infrastructure is immense. And so less of a question, more of a expansion of you saying the heritage and what we're up against, because they do. And I will say it's oil-soaked money across this town. That's those are the big funders in most of these cases. You have others, but the extractive industries are the evil behind a ton of this infrastructure.
Yeah, and the Heritage Foundation is still shaping policy. They took a lot of credit for Trump's work requirements for food stamps, for example. And then you had people like Art Laffer, who was a Reagan era economic advisor, right at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, saying, "Oh, it's fine, send workers back to their debts, no big deal." And so
you saw what he just said, right? About $15 minimum wage.
Oh yeah.
Those people, and then he listed them. He's like, women and people of color and younger people, they're not worth $15.
Yeah.
This guy, how is he still allowed to have that presence? Sorry, Sarah.
No, so the battle of ideas, it's not academic, it's not theoretical. It has really important and dire consequences for people, and that's what we're up against. We're the same ghouls who were behind the failed violent policies of the Reagan era are still in the mix and still shaping policy, and we have to somehow defeat them and hopefully use every tool in our tool belt, one of which is fiction.
Jocelyn.
Oh, sorry. I lost my StreamYard. Sorry. Yeah, I love what you say about that, Sarah, because I think about that a lot. This isn't emotional, and I think that, it's been said before, but I think we need to say it a bunch of other times. We as intellectuals, well, not we as leftists tend to be more intellectual, not because we're brilliant people, but they've done all these studies about political alignment and personality. And just by virtue of living in America in its current form, if you're a leftist, you're going to be somebody who is more open to a new way of doing things, more driven by idea, because it doesn't exist yet. We're trying to build something that doesn't exist yet. So of course, if you're on this side of things, you tend to either have been incredibly oppressed or because tons of oppressed people have been brainwashed with this stuff as well, or be someone who's more open to new ideas. And so we have to be willing to engage in this emotional war of ideas, which I think is counterintuitive to a lot of us. It's but have you not seen the UN's latest projections or the WHO says about COVID? It doesn't work on that level. If these were people who were swayed by that sort of information, they would be, especially now that we have social media. Everything is out there all the time. And the GOP, along with having more money than us, which let's not minimize that, but they also are just more willing to engage in that war of ideas in a way that is visceral. And we have to go there too, or we'll lose. We'll keep losing because we lose a lot. But is that doom and gloom? I try to be positive.
No, you got to show the stakes. You got to make people understand the stakes. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people who are working really hard on that. And one way to show the stakes is to tell stories and sort of look at how the macro affects the micro.
I want to probably close out, unless Jocelyn has one other question. I want to just open. I want to let you take it where you want to go, but something that we keep talking about with the asymmetrical support with money. I want to push in on that a little bit. You can go with that or go a different direction. The money that is on the left is actually generally, and I would say like 80 to 90% is actually liberal money, right? So it's like the support that there is actually quite to the center towards neoliberalism, and sometimes explicitly neoliberal, right? So if you're trying to do a leftist analysis and you're talking about capitalism and the system, if there is funding, it often is like, oh yeah, I love your ideas. If you could tone it down just a little, and that corruption that slowly muffles the radical voice is corrosive. Its effect is so bad. And I just want to what your book is very radical. It's not that. And what we try to bring here is also not that. And what Strong Arm Press is interested in is not that. And so we have to build stuff on distributed, aggregating individual people, small dollar donations. We're working on that with Strong Arm Press. We have to build that system for publishing and books, and getting leftists to buy leftist books and support leftist endeavors, because the system is not there otherwise. And to get the resources from in a big way, like a big check, it would naturally pull it to the right. Even if it's sort of democratic money, it's going to not be leftist money.
No, that's a really important point. Neoliberalism is something to be very wary about. It requires a lot of caution and sophistication to navigate away from it. We tried very hard to avoid a neoliberal framework in the book. The enemies are named very clearly. Mm-hmm. And also we tried to avoid a one great man view of history and instead look at how actually the heroes are a bunch of okay, ordinary, flawed people who are able to be greater than the sum of their parts by banding together against overwhelming systems of corruption and greed.
Sarah, thank you so much for being with us. Everyone, the pre-order link for her book, out officially July 20th, should be in the description of this video, and I will put it in the comments as well. Really excited, really excited. You guys should read it. It is very, very good. I'm not just saying that. I wouldn't, be hyping it like this. I'd be like, yeah, everyone has to have a hobby. But it's really great, and I really recommend it. So thank you, Sarah, for being with us today.
Thank you so much, and thanks to both of you for being such big supporters of the book. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
It's a fun one because it is us working on multiple different, right? It's like we work on the book with Sarah, publishing it, and now we have her on the show to promote it. It's that last part I said, and I think that Sarah repeated really well, or that it's in the book too. We can't rely on any big savior or
I'm glad you
cavalry.
went there, yeah.
There is no cavalry coming, and we need to support our own endeavors. It has to be part of people's analysis, and people don't have to be perfect. They don't have to buy only Strong Arm Press books or only read, watch Means TV and We Act Radio or Solidarity Live. But they should weave it into their consumption patterns because that is the only way that we can build out stuff like this. And in her book, it's normal people banding together to solve what seems like an unsolvable problem or defeat what seems like an undefeatable foe. So you probably know where I'm going with this, is that it sounds like with solidarity, we can win, but it's only with solidarity, including in how you choose some fiction books to read. Like you could read all of the famous ones, maybe you have tons of time and you can do that. But maybe choose to read authors like Sarah, who are ideologically aligned with you, who are not, you know, don't have the publishing world pushing out, you know, a new, I don't know any of the big famous authors. I was searching for one, but like Peterson, maybe, like there's these thriller authors that my parents love. And that machine is like clockwork, right? They release a new one every couple months, and it's got a huge canon. James Patterson, it's got a huge canon behind it, distribution canon. And we don't have that. So like it is an act of solidarity when you find something like Sarah's book, to actually buy it, to read it, to give it a chance, and when you like it, to actually pay that forward, to pass it on and get somebody else to buy it. And that is a small act of solidarity, and the only way that we can face down these giant systems, the publishing world, which is part of.
And, you know, I mean, I really do. I know we have like 2 seconds, but it is really essential. I think it's really easy sometimes for us to feel disempowered, like, wow, you know, we're up against so much and I'm just like this random person. But there are just so many more of us. And if we waited for all of us to be perfect before we started organizing, then nothing would have ever happened in history. And we have won so many times. We don't have slavery. Women can vote. There is a minimum wage, which, yes, it should be higher, but we used to not even have one. So, yeah. And whoa, I can't believe I'm just saying this at the end. It's worth noting that a lot of the progressive movement was sort of lit on by the work of novelist Upton Sinclair. So never underestimate fiction or art.
Talking about Chicago.
Yeah,
Illinois.
about Chicago. Yeah, that's true, isn't it? So it's been lovely. I really like this. It is a really good book. I hope you guys all go buy it.
Thank you all for joining us on Solidarity Live, and we will see you again next week.
Mm-hmm.